Om asato ma sadagamaya tamaso homaham jyotirgamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avir avir maedhi Rudra yate dakshinam mukha te namaha paha inityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is the awakening of spiritual consciousness. The Vedas speak of a mythical homa bird. The homa bird does not live on this earth. It does not build her nest in trees, but flies and lives way high up in the sky. That is in the ionosphere. and with her wings outstretched, floats round and round. Never sets foot on the earth. And when she lays an egg, well, she laid one egg, and what happened? Well, there's no nest. And so the egg began to fall. And it was so high up that it took a couple days to fall all the way down. But now we can visualize it falling at 32 feet per second. That is, it's accelerating to terminal velocity. And as it entered into the atmosphere, well, that even the rarefied air of the ionosphere warmed it up a little, and it started to incubate. And it incubated, continuing plummeting towards the earth. Came into a heavier layer of the stratosphere, and the egg warmed up even more. The little bird, he really grew a head. You got a head, you got a beak, got two legs, grew wings, getting warmer and warmer inside of this egg as he's hurtling towards the earth. And, well, that little bird began to think, here I am inside this egg. Why don't I just think outside the box or something? He began pecking at that shell. He pecked at the shell, and sure enough, soon he found himself out, but still plummeting towards the earth through the stratosphere. Now he's in the mesosphere, and he's tumbling round and round on the whoosh of the air. And as he tumbles round and round, he's down now into the lower part of the troposphere, nearing the earth. He's tumbling up, or looks up and he sees the sun, turns around, he sees a mountain peak, turns around again, he sees a cloud, and the next thing he knows, he's looking at the earth coming up towards him, and seeing that earth looming towards him. He gives out a shrill cry. And just before he hits the earth, makes a U-turn, spreads his wings, and flies back up to his mother in the sky. Now we may ask, well, why is it that that homa bird flew up into the air? And the answer is, well, he must have seen something was going to happen. That is, he saw things as they really are. We don't see things as they are. We live our lives looking at life through rose-colored glasses. We see the world through a glass darkly. But if we could somehow take off those spectacles of our own pratibhasika projections, then we would see things as the great Lord Buddha saw them. That is, things as they are, they have three signs of being. The first sign of being is that all is suffering. And you may think, well, that's kind of a negative thing to say. That's kind of a pessimistic attitude towards life. But as students of philosophy, we can begin to understand the truth that there is no person, place, or material thing or state of affairs in this world that can give us the happiness that we seek. After all, we seek infinite happiness. Yogai homa tatsugam nalpe sugamasti. It means, well, there's no happiness in the finite. Happiness and joy is only in the infinite. And we can never find the infinite in the finite. Therefore, we suffer. And not only do we suffer from our choices, but our choices will, according to the great law of karma, we know that every choice and every action leaves its impression, that is a samskara, in the mind. And that samskara, those samskaras accumulate, and they become vasanas, and we get caught up in repetition compulsion, and as a result of which, we are caught in the vicious circles of karma and continue on caught in samsara. That is in life, reborn, and life after life. Now you may say, well, yeah, all is suffering, but why don't we just be a little more open-minded? Maybe we would say, it's not really all suffering. Buddha was, maybe he meant, you see, there's a lot, we know there's a lot of, let's say there's half suffering. It's kind of like a coin. To heads and tails, there's two sides. There is suffering, yes, there's happiness and there's misery. Let's look at it that way. And can't we just kind of accept things as they are, deal with the suffering, and then also enjoy the happiness? Why can't we just enjoy a little happiness? Well, that's because there is no happiness. That's because all is suffering. Why is there no happiness? That's because the second law, the second sign of being, because all is transitory. That is, wherever we get, even if we think it's happiness, that is, it will slip through our fingers. Everything in life is transitory. As a drop of water on a lotus leaf in the pond, you see the lotus leaves? The water just falls on the leaf and then it slips and slides off into the pond. So all that is transitory, but you may say, well, yes, there is happiness, moments of happiness in life may be transitory, but can't we just enjoy them anyhow? And maybe we could be very clever if we were if we planned ahead. We could put all of those moments of happiness together. We could string them all together, one after the next, if we had very good planning, and we could have a whole string of happiness experiences. And thus we could kind of beat the system. But that doesn't work either, because of the third sign of being, all is empty. That is to say, everything is meaningless. Everything is purposeless. Everything is without that real substance that we seek to make our life meaningful. We live today as if we live in a world of name and form, and as our illusions, dreams or illusions, or a castle in the air, so is the world viewed by the wise in the Vedanta. So we use the metaphor there of the homa bird, and we have a kind of a spatial metaphor. It's going down and up, and we could maybe extend that metaphor to a different spatial dimension of inward and outward. The Sanskrit words here are Pravritti and Nivritti. We'll introduce a few terms of art that will help us to clarify our predicament. Pravritti and Nivritti. Pravritti means the kind of cycling outward. Nivritti is cycling inward. And the idea is that in the history of the evolution of the human soul, the current of the psychic prana, that means our minds, move kind of in a great cycle. And we can visualize maybe something like an evolutionary clock. Beginning at 12 o'clock, the hands on the clock is say at 12 o'clock, and they move down past 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock, up to 9 o'clock, and back to 12. And we could visualize them as they're moving towards the 3 o'clock. We could see they're moving outward and downward. And around 6 o'clock, there's begin a shift in the direction of our consciousness to begin to move inward and upward. So that's Pravritti and Nivritti. We could say, now we're talking here with extroversion and introversion, not in the psychological sense, but in kind of in religious language, that half of our life cycle of the evolution of the soul is all about extroversion. But around about 6 o'clock, there's a change, and it becomes introversion. There's, during the Pravritti, we seek for happiness outside. We seek for happiness in sense objects. That is our goal, and the purpose of our life is to achieve happiness. At some time, however, after we've had long experience in the evolution of the soul, we realize the teaching of Vedanta, the goal of life is not happiness, but the goal of life is knowledge, self-knowledge. Maybe we could stretch the word happiness by putting a capital H on it. Move that over to the other Nivritti side. But the goal and purpose of life is self-actualization and is self-knowledge. Once there was a man who was, he got up in the morning and he had his breakfast and he was feeling full of energy. He looked out the windows and the sun was shining and the birds were singing. And he thought to himself, what a beautiful day outside, but I'm going to go out and get some work done. And so he went out and he started work. And he mowed the lawn. That took him some time. He watered the whole lawn. He watered the flowers. Then he began to clip the hedges. He pruned some hedges, then he went around the driveway, he saw his car there, he got out the bucket, the water, and the hose, he washed his car, getting a lot done. In the afternoon, he went down the backyard. There in the backyard, he was digging in the garden, pulling weeds, clipping the hedges, painting the side of the barn. And by that, around about 5:30 or 6 o'clock, it's getting a little dark. He got sitting there on the front porch, and he was thinking, yeah, got a lot done. That's very good. But now it's getting dark. I can't do any more. But I got a lot of energy. And then his thoughts turned. He thought, why don't I go inside and do a little more cleaning, do some cleaning in there? So he goes in. Now it's pitch dark outside. He goes in. We could visualize here that he goes in, he turns on the light, but the light is off. That is, the power's off. Power outage. So what can he do? Now he's a little frustrated, but he wants to do some work. He strikes a match, looks around, finds his flashlight. Now he has a flashlight. He looks around, finds his candles. Yeah. So he lights a candle, puts it in the living room, puts another candle in the kitchen, takes the candle upstairs. Ah, yes, now he can do some work. So he gets to work, and he picks up things around, cleans and tidies up the living room, goes in the kitchen, washes the dishes, and he works there on the first floor, goes up on the second floor, and he's making the beds, and he's cleaning the bathroom, and he mops the floor. He does a lot of work, and round about 2 in the morning, the power comes back on, and he thinks, very good. Now I can do some vacuuming. So he gets the vacuum, he's starting, and we can imagine people next door, they're listening, 2 in the morning, the man vacuuming away at his house. But he vacuums till the early morning, and then he finishes. He comes down, he's sitting there, and he sits down in his easy chair. He looks out the window. The sun it's dawn. It's already day. He spent the whole night. And he's very tired, but he feels happy. He's done a lot of work. And there you see now, the dawn is rising, the sun is rising. He did a lot of work. He did a lot of outer work and a lot of inner work. And, well, that's Pravritti and Nivritti. And there he sat there. But let's go back here to that point at which he's sitting on the porch. It's around about 6 o'clock. It's kind of like a turning point. And somehow that thought came into his mind to go inward. In the Upanishads, a famous verse, Paranjikani vetrat swayambhus tasmat paran pashyati nantaratman kaschidhira pratyagatmanamaikshara vritta chakshuramatatramichan. That means that sometimes I quote Sanskrit verses just to show us that what we are discussing here is saying this is kind of like philosophy. Philosophy means discussion of age-old problems. And so all that we're discussing was discussed thousands of years ago, and even in ancient times. An old Sanskrit verse, it says, ask this interesting question, because it says, when we are born, we're born with our senses, all the 5 senses are directed outwards. And thus we seek for happiness outside. It's just natural. That's what everybody does. So, but then you think that back in the history of the evolution of mankind, there must have been the first guy who thought, after pursuing happiness in the external world, that this is not working. And he had the bright idea, there must have been the first person. I'm paraphrasing here the verse. That first person, he kind of got some wisdom. And he decided, rather than looking outwards, he said, I'll close my eyes and look inwards. And he did so. And thus he began inner work and the inward journey. Pravritti, Nivritti. Pravritti is outward and downward. Downward like the homa bird. Nivritti is inward and upward. Drawing the attention, that is our consciousness, inward and upward to realize our life goal. So the awakening of spiritual consciousness. There was a famous name in 19th century in Indian history. His name was Lala Babu. Now, Lala Babu lived in Calcutta. He was a businessman, a zemindar of sorts. That is, he was a landowner, a landlord. But he also had several very successful businesses. He was wealthy, and he lived in a grandiose mansion on the hill. He had children, grown children, and lived happily there with his wife and his children, his grandchildren. And one day, but he spent his whole life in business, never thought much about religion. And one day he was strolling back towards his home after a day's work. And he was at that time, he was about 65 years old. And as he strolled back by the banks of the river Ganges, he heard near the river Ganges, you walk along, maybe you will see, I don't know if that's today, maybe you won't see them. But they used to have washermen. washerman, that's a caste. And they wash clothes. They don't have washing machines. They take the clothes and they just kind of swing them over and over and beat them on like a flat rock in the water on the banks of the river Ganges. And so as she's walking along, he heard that slap, slap of the cloths on the rocks. And then he heard the voice of one of the daughters of the washerman. And the daughter is addressing her father. She says, "Father, it's getting dark. It's getting late. I think you should burn the vasanas." There's a play on words there, vasanas. In the Indian language, refers to the skins of the plantain fruit. Also, they use the leaves for a different preparation. And it's used that when those are burnt, they make the alkali that's used for making soap. So that's how they used to make a kind of a potash for making soap. And she's saying, "Father, isn't it time to begin to make that ash? Prepare the vasanas." And Lala Babu, hearing this, he was taken aback. He just stood stock still because he thought vasanas means your samskaras, that means your worldly tendencies. Isn't it time to do something about those? And so thinking, he went home, and the very next day, he turned over his whole business to his sons, and he retired from worldly life, left his business, left his big mansion, his family behind, and went to Vrindavan. And there he became kind of like a holy man. And even today you can see a famous temple that was built by Lala Babu in Vrindavan. That is, he had an awakening of spiritual consciousness just by that hearing that words of that washerman's daughter. And I'm sure that you, as students of comparative religion, know many other stories about how it come to a turning point in our life, and we kind of begin a new direction in our life. Let's look at this term, the awakening of spiritual consciousness. Let's look at that term. What is spiritual consciousness? Well, the word consciousness, by the word consciousness, of course, we are in Vedanta, we know very well what is consciousness. Consciousness is ourself. Now, the word consciousness, it may refer to ourself with a capital S, that is Shuddha Chaitanya, or it may refer also to our self with a small s, but it is our true nature. This morning we're talking just about our ordinary, everyday walking around self-consciousness, our I consciousness. And our I consciousness is ourself. Consciousness is ourself. And Vedanta teaches us that weirdly we have two selves. That is, there's a lower self and there is a higher self. Actually, Vedanta teaches that we have 6 selves, but we won't go into all those 5 points. We're going to talk here about we're going to talk here about our lower self and the higher self. And it makes a very, yoga psychology, makes a very helpful distinction for us between two Sanskrit words. We're talking about yoga psychology, that is the analysis of the mind. In yoga psychology, they speak of the mind as having two parts. That is the manas and the buddhi. The lower self and the higher self, we could call it the manomaya atma and the vijnanamaya atma. You know, we have a body self, we have the annamaya atma, pranamaya atma. Now we're talking about the manomaya atma and the vijnanamaya atma. And there's another atma in deep sleep. We're not talking about that. And we're not talking about the shuddhatma. We're talking just about our ordinary self-consciousness. And in our ordinary experience, we know on reflection that we have two selves. There's the lower self, and there is the higher self. Now let's look first at the manomaya atma. That means the self. Atma is the word for the self. The self, which is identified with the manas. Now the manas is the lower mind. We could say that it is our mind, that's our everyday walking around psychology mind. It's our mind that is identified with the body and with the senses, and which receives information through the senses, and which orients, we're oriented by that input of information. And in common parlance, the self identified with that level of our mind is, we call it the ego. That's the who I am. Who am I? Well, I'm the body. I am the mind. I'm looking for happiness. That is, my whole consciousness is turned outwards, pravritti. The direction of my consciousness is outward, seeking for, driven by a sense of incompleteness and seeking for a sense of fulfillment and purpose in the external world. I pursue sense objects in the external world. This is the manomaya atma, the lower self. This is our self. And the lower mind, that is, we can say, is very child. Well, we won't say childlike. We'll say it's like a child, but really we're not children. We're adults, so we have to say it's childish. That is, the lower mind is childish. It acts on, that is, it's naive. It's a mind, is a lower mind is a mind which hasn't done introspection, doesn't know anything about philosophy, hasn't thought much about philosophy, and who just lives their life kind of by conventional wisdom, and believes that that we can find happiness and find fulfillment in the external world. And so we move through life. Now, the lower mind is not completely lacking in intelligence. It's not completely lacking even in reason. But that reason, what little that we have, is held hostage by the vasanas, The vasanas means the tendencies. If you take all of your past actions, they leave impressions in the mind. They're called samskaras. They collate to form habits. The habits themselves aggregate to form vasanas. That means tendencies, just speaking very generally. Likes and dislikes. We live our lives in pursuit of our own likes and dislikes. And that's how we live our life. We want to get what we want. And anything that happens to us, the standard by which we gauge all of our experiences every moment of every day is, do I like it or don't I like it? That means, is it consistent if something happens? Is it consistent with my vasanas, or is it isn't? If you're on your way to an important meeting and you get stuck in traffic, that's not consistent with your vasanas. Because your vasanas generate hopes and expectations. You have a whole mental model of what's going to happen that day. You have got your plans. And these plans are now been torpedoed by that traffic jam, and thus, of course, your desire to get to the object, that is to achieve the conclusion of the event. You're attached to the event. You've projected yourself. You become the event. You are the event. That's what attachment is. You see yourself in the event. Therefore, you want to complete it. And therefore, you're angry. That is, when your desire is frustrated. We know that that's where anger comes from. And anger means stress. And this is how we go through our whole lives. Now, sometimes we get things that we like. And those things, yeah, okay, we enjoy those. We don't notice them much. But they also generate stress. So that's likes and dislikes. We go through life. And yeah, we're guided by some little bit of intelligence, reasoning. But you see, that reason has been held hostage by the manas. It's like it's in a box. It's like in a box. We think about the homa bird. It's like that's the ego. The ego is like being in a box. And everything he has a little intelligence inside that box, and uses that to figure out where he's going to go in order to satisfy desires. And this is our condition. This is the manas. It's called manas because the Sanskrit word, it's the same Sanskrit word, or the Indo-Aryan root that gives us the word man. That's our mind. That's what we call our mind. That's my thinking mind. And now let's look at that condition. This is ourself as we're living our life. Now let's look at a person. What is a model for living a full, rich, harmonious life is given to us in the Gita. One of the verses there of the Gita, famous verse, Atmanam ratinam vidhi shariram ratameva tu buddhim tu saratim vidhi mana pragraham eva cha, 2 verses. It says there, visualize the body is like a chariot. And the chariot is being drawn by 4 horses. And the horses are with the harness. There's the reins that are being held by the charioteer. And in the charioteer, in addition to the charioteer, there stands what Sri Krishna there, like the image of the soul. And so the verses say that the body is like the chariot, the senses are like the horses, and the mind is like the reins, and the buddhi is like the charioteer. Now, the analogy that I use, I'll give you a little Western version. The Westernized version is the version of the stagecoach. Forget about the chariot. Stagecoach is driving along, and inside the stagecoach, there is a beautiful lady. That's the soul. Our soul, our anima, is there in the stagecoach and overtaken by highwaymen and by outlaws. And the coach is stopped, and the passengers are robbed, and the driver is tied up and thrown into the stagecoach. And then the outlaws, they stampede the horses. And they laugh as that stagecoach goes roaring down, maybe towards an open cliff there, as the horses are galloping out of control, and there's dust flying everywhere, people crying out. Well, see, that's our condition today. That's the manas. The manas, our mind. What is the solution to that? That's not the way it's supposed to be. The way it's supposed to be is there's supposed to be a driver there. That is, we need to have the driver of the chariot, the buddhi. Well, we've got to untie that guy. That's where he's tied up in the coach. We've got to get him untied, get him up there onto the driver's seat, get him into the driver's seat, and then he's got to get down. He's got to get those reins. The reins are the manas. That is the mind, and he's got to get the mind under control. So let's look here at the buddhi, the higher mind. This is the vijnana maya atma. The higher mind is called, in Western psychology, it's called the intellect. The buddhi is always translated as the intellect. The intellect means the seat of reason. Reason is what makes us human. Only human beings have reason as we understand it. Animals also have some reason, but it is involved reason. So animals, though, are like that. We are like animals. That is Shankaracharya, the Adhyasa Bhashya there. He makes it very clear. He gets a picture there, a big cow. There's a cow. You're like that cow. As long as we're identified with the manas, we live like cows. We have no control over ourself. The intellect, however, is the intellect. Now, the intellect is reason. What is reason? Well, Western philosopher Immanuel Kant, he kind of finished off that whole subject in 3 books. The Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, and the Critique of Reflective Judgment. That means moral reasoning and aesthetic. This is all the higher functions of the rational cognitive mind, our higher self. Now, yeah, we use that. We make aesthetic judgments, but it's all about things which are, like I say, the higher mind is held in hostage by the lower mind. And although we may make a reasonable decision, it's a decision about apara jnana. That is, it's a decision about which television program should I watch, A or B. You make a rational decision. But it's not about higher knowledge. And the buddhi, that means the intellect, that means the vijnanamaya atma is the higher mind. We could call it our higher self. It is our self. It is our atma. It's not the shuddhatma. That is, it's not, and this is where it gets confusing maybe for some people. There's a shuddhatma, the atman with a capital A. This is for all, but let's forget about all these fine points. It is our self. It is our knowledge self. That's the literal meaning of it. The buddhi, our higher mind, is made of pure sattva particles. and therefore it functions like a mirror. It reflects consciousness. Here we're talking about yoga psychology. The yogis believe that we believe in self-psychology. That means that consciousness is not part of the mind, but the consciousness, pure consciousness, is reflected in the mind. And where is it reflected? It is reflected, that is our self. And there need be no confusion about the word Atma, because there's really only one self, and that's ourself. So there's no point in getting confused. You look in the mirror, and what do you see? You see yourself. And in the reflection of the mirror, that is the pure, that is so we can say the pure mind, the higher self, when it is purified, when it's really functioning as it should function, then it reflects our true self. And a higher function, this buddhi, the intellect, has a higher function. The evolved buddhi is called intuition. And so we have reason, and the purpose of reasoning. What is the purpose of reasoning? It is to gain knowledge. And in the light of our higher self reflected in the pure mind, what are we interested in? We're interested in knowledge, that is in higher knowledge, the para vidya. The reasoning now has shifted. So let's imagine now ourself, if we could shift get outside the box and get outside the ego and ascend into our higher self, that is our intelligent self, our knowledge self, our buddhi, that is the intellect. And the important thing to understand here is that, and that's the beauty and the sense of the Indian analysis of manas and the buddhi. See, in the Western psychology, all this is mixed up. In Indian psychology, the clear difference between the lower and the higher. And if you can shift your identification, now that's what they're saying, if you shift your identification from the lower self to the higher self, then you begin to identify with the higher self. Now you are no longer the manomaya atma, now you are the vijnanamaya atma. That's your identity. That means there's been a shifting here of the center of gravity. And as a result of which there's a radical change in your conception of yourself. Because the buddhi is aware of himself as a higher being, in search of higher knowledge. And the buddhi, because it's, see the analogy here is spatial analogy, lower and higher. Because it is higher, it is above the lower self. That's why it's called unselfish. Unselfish means it's not identified with the manas. It's identified with the buddhi, and therefore it's unselfish. And as a result, it's now no longer exclusively identified, I should say. Now, we're not talking here about enlightenment and Brahma-jnana and Atma. We're not talking, spiritual life hasn't even, we're not talking about anything about religion. We're just talking about psychology. And once the mind would shift to that higher space, we become more unselfish. That's because we become more objective. The intellect it's called the intellect because intelligence now is clearly reflected in that mirror. And that is, we live objectively. We make objective decisions. That means we have clear judgment. That means they're no longer like children, no longer childish judgments, but more mature judgments. And therefore the buddhi in its proper place becomes, in the evolved mind, becomes the master of the lower mind. becomes the ruler of the lower mind and lives as a master and not as a slave. And this buddhi, that is our higher self, that is, it has certain characteristics. I'll just mention a few of those characteristics that are important because they, what time is it? I can't see that. Okay, a few more minutes. Some characteristics of the buddhi very important to us because they form the prerequisites for spiritual practice. And spiritual practice is not going to do us much good until we have begun to identify with the Vijnanamaya Atma. And once that shift has taken place, it will manifest in various ways. Now, I've already mentioned a few manifestations: a sense of clarity of a higher self, an intelligent self, a knowledge self, we could call it, the one word here they give is viveka. Viveka means discrimination. The buddhi is the source, it gives the self, identified with the buddhi, has the power to discriminate. That is, he is a man of discriminating taste. And a person who can discriminate between lower values and higher values. And a person who therefore chooses the higher values every day, says in the Upanishads, every day, shreyascha preyascha, manusya me tastau. That is to say, we are at a crossroads every moment of every day. We have to choose. We're making choice. We have free choice. We have free will. We can choose between A and B. A is the shreyas and the preyas. That means the good and the pleasant. The wise man here is that is to say, is the buddhi. That means the intelligent self chooses the good. And the foolish person, that means the manomaya atma, he will choose the pleasant. And so we have here the discrimination. It's called viveka, the person who can see clearly what is good and according to, well, you can say, well, I know what's good, but I don't always choose what's good. Well, that's because we don't really know what's good. That's why we have to. That's why it assumes, like, it assumes that we have an objective understanding of what is the good, and there's no one who would choose between that which is for their good. Then, of course, the good and the pleasant. The pleasant ultimately is just rajas, that is, it appears to be pleasant now, but later on down the road, if you could see down the road, you'd see it's not to your own benefit. It's not, will not serve you. And so everyone will choose, if they're in their right mind, they will choose that which serves them. That is, they will choose the good, and they will easily reject the pleasant. That means they'll have vairagya. A person who has self-control and who is a master of himself and who has some higher, you can say, we use the word intellect and reason. Maybe you don't like those words. They sound, let's use the word wisdom. That's the word that Plato uses for our higher faculty, the wisdom faculty. It's the wise man makes the right choice. And he also has, he doesn't take the path of the pleasant. He takes the path of the good, and thus he has vairagya. In Sanskrit, it's called the buddhi is often translated, or that is Swami Vedarupananda translated it as the determinative faculty. That means that the determinative faculty, that means once the buddhi decides what to do, then automatically the mind and the heart and the speech and the actions follow like slaves. And that's because that's what we call willpower. Willpower means that you have willpower if you are identified with a Vijnanamaya Atma, and you are the master of your lower self, and you use your mind as your instrument. So this is the higher mind. This is the qualities. That is jnana. Then the qualities, the vairagya, beginning to manifest all of these virtues. And the last quality of the buddhi is called mumukshutvam. That means there comes into the mind the thought of a kind of dispassion for that is, mumukshutvam means the longing for freedom. See, now everybody wants freedom. Everyone in the world wants nothing but freedom. We want to be free of blood, free of suffering. But the buddhi sees that everybody wants to be free of suffering. Yeah, but what about the whole just being in the relative world is suffering? Therefore, why not get rid of that too? And seek to, there comes a feeling, a longing for a higher freedom. And mumukshutva there means not just negation of the world, not just dispassion for the world, but a higher longing. That is, the homa bird seeks to return. It's not just getting away from the earth. It's seeking to return to his mother in the sky. And so it goes in pursuit of moksha, which is freedom. So here, it's at this point, we can see really an awakening of spiritual consciousness. This is the point in people's lives when, we become interested in soul, God, and religion. Never thought of it much before. People maybe seek out some philosophy, seek out a spiritual teacher, begin to do some spiritual practice. These are people who are really, or fit disciples, who are really ready to begin spiritual practice. And so that's our subject here, the awakening of spiritual consciousness. It's marked maybe we may not be aware of it in our own life when we think back in retrospect of our life. But in fact, if we were to see kind of with a bird's eye view, maybe we would see, yes, it's had a transformative effect in our lives. It has internal effects. That is, we've had a complete change of, that's why we're interested in soul, God, and religion, because we've had a complete change of our whole value system has been restructured and reordered. A new sense of self. We've gotten a whole new sense of our purpose of life, the meaning of life, and these are internal changes. Those were all, if we could look back on our life, we could see, that those were also accompanied by external changes. At some point, we became interested in those things. At some point, our behavior and our speech and our actions began to change. We maybe changed in search of our dharma, our purpose, changed in the workplace, change in our circle of friends. And all of these represent a kind of a transformative effect of the awakening of spiritual consciousness. Therefore, if anybody asks you, have you had any spiritual experiences? Maybe somebody will ask you that. If they do, you can say, yes, I've had a very great spiritual experience, an awakening of spiritual consciousness. Om Dyo Shantihi, Antariksha Ham Shantihi, Prithivi Shantihi, Apa Shantihi, O Shadaya Shantihi, Vanaspataya Shantihi, Vishwe Deva Shantihi, Brahma Shantihi, Saravam Shantihi, Shantireva Shantihi, Same Shantirehi, Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.
Thank you to Swami Vedarupananda for his beautiful talk this morning. Next week, our speaker will be Swami Mahayogananda. His topic, Sri Ramakrishna and Kali. As you may know, we celebrated the Kali Puja last night, and the temple is still vibrating with the spiritual mood of that service. We have classes on Tuesdays at 4:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m., Wednesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m., Thursdays at 7:30 p.m., and Fridays at 7:30 p.m. Open to all via internet only. And I think that's about it. I don't think we really have much time for questions. Do you want to take any questions, Swami Vedarupananda? Would you like to take any questions?
Not necessary now.
I think we're not in the mood for questions today, so thank you for joining us and have a great Sunday.